Good morning, everyone. This is Frank Donaldson, and I'd like to welcome you to our first 2016 webinar, Establishing an Affirming, Welcoming, and Engaging Culture in Your Catholic School. Out of all the webinars, I guess, that we have presented over the last number of years, I can truthfully say that I'm about excited about this one as any of the ones that we have done. There's a lot of reasons for this, as I think we'll see as we move on through it. But I'm using this little acronym AWE, AWE. And as we talk about it, we're going to keep referring to those words, affirming, welcoming, and engaging. And hopefully I can state the case for this as we move on through and share with you a bunch of different ideas about this particular topic. As always, we will send you a copy of the PowerPoint. Usually it takes us between 3 and 5 days to get that out. So please be aware that it does take that amount of time. Number two, if you would like to receive a copy and make sure that you receive a copy, please stay on the line and take the little short survey of 6 or 7 questions at the end of the webinar. That registers your name with GoToWebinar and allows us to see that you took the webinar, and obviously we send the webinar to those who took it. We usually do not get into the habit of sending it to those who are not here because there's no explanation with it. But thirdly, we have been recording the webinars, and this one is being recorded. And if you'd like a copy of that, then you need to request it. We'll usually upload that to YouTube in 3 to 5 days, and you then can be able to view it there. But let us indeed begin with this topic. Really an exciting topic to me, because as I look at it and look at what we're presenting, I've been involved in this work now for 26 plus years. And if there's any area that I feel that really is going to have as large of impact on our development, advancement, enrollment management efforts, it is this topic. But we are talking about something that is really exciting, but also at the same time very challenging. So we're going to focus on what this webinar is about in just a minute, so I can make sure that you understand what we're talking about when we use that acronym. We're going to talk about how we do what we do. We're going to talk about why this is so important as opposed to back in the 60s and 70s, when we probably did not have the many challenges that we have today. We're going to look at those challenges, stare them straight in the eye and recognize them. We're going to talk about what do we mean by this word culture. We're going to seek to understand this culture, what we're talking of, and look at its characteristics, and we're going to suggest 10 steps to establishing this culture, which is the most exciting part for me, because once a Catholic school has established or begun to establish this or continues to establish this, then it is amazing what the results can be. And then obviously there's some resources I'm going to share with you that we integrated into this PowerPoint. And then we'll talk about some of our offerings at the very end. Let's begin. This is basic information we show in every webinar, where if you have a need to get in touch with us, obviously it is in these opening slides in terms of contact information by way of website, emails, and phone numbers. But let us understand what the focus is of this webinar. It is focusing on the importance of affirming, welcoming, and engaging culture in a Catholic school, and the powerful impact that this type of culture can and will have on your advancement and development efforts. There's a lot of things that have been done in advancement and development, in total stewardship and enrollment management, and marketing and fundraising. And many times these efforts are good, sometimes they're outstanding, and sometimes they fall less than what they were capable of doing. And so as we talk about this, we're going to focus on what we really mean by these words, advancement and development. I'm talking about how do we advance your Catholic school? How do we develop your Catholic school? This is not a webinar on fundraising. This is a webinar on how can we advance, how can we develop, how can we make sure that things really are exciting as we move to the future. And so, with that in mind, I think it's important that we view this from that perspective. This is not a webinar on Catholic culture in terms of any other areas except for this. And we even referred to it in our subtitle as developing, quote unquote, your fan base. I believe in this next quote. If we always do what we've always done, then we'll always get what we've always gotten. We're going to talk about a shift today. What's really interesting about this shift, I've often equated this to an analogy that I use in my consulting. When we start working with a Catholic school or a parish or a diocese, I say, oftentimes in the beginning of any type of change, whether that change is going to be new change or whether it's going to be continuing the change, it's sort of like you're standing at the wheel of an ocean-going vessel, and you have to travel 1,000 miles. As you stand as the captain or co-captain of that ship, if you, by chance, would make a wrong move on that wheel of some 5 or 10 degrees, in the first 50 miles of that 1,000-mile trip, you probably are not going to see much of a change or even recognize it. But as you move out into those 5, 6, 7, 800 miles out, you're going to realize that you have been way off the mark. It's important that we follow the compass, not the clock. It's important that we chart our course because we are challenged today like never before. And so as we talk about this, I think it's important that we understand what we mean by this word culture. From Jim King with NCA, culture is less about what is done and more about how it is done. It's a great quote. How do we do the things that we do? We all do them. We all hold open houses. We all teach English. We all monitor the cafeteria. We all answer the phones. But how do we do it? How we do what we do? How is that potential parent treated when she calls the office? How is that prospective family treated at the school tour? How are parents greeted as they come to the school office? How are students treated in that classroom? How is the teacher treated when it's time for contract renewal? How are all people affirmed and commended? How are new families that join you in their first year welcomed? How are your volunteers appreciated? How are alums invited back to school? We all have, as Catholic schools, we have all of this in place. But there's that 3-letter word, how. How do we do this? How do we invite people to support the annual fund? And how do we communicate with our parents about tuition and fees? And how is that athlete treated on the practice field or the basketball court? How does that finance committee communicate? How does the president, principal, or pastor communicate? And so how becomes the key. How we develop relationships. How are the hallways as students change and go to class? What are those hallways like? For some schools, this culture of affirming, welcoming, and engaging is a shift in the way we operate. not to be in reactive, but rather be in proactive mode. And so as we look at this and we talk about Catholic school culture, indeed, we say it is systemic, and it becomes important. I can remember back in the early days when I first started teaching, and we'll look at some slides on that in a minute. The classrooms were filled. The coffers were filled. There were waiting lists. It was a different world back then. My first year of teaching at De La Salle High School was 1967. Technology was an opaque projector and a ditto machine. We didn't even have electricity. It was a hand crank ditto machine. Students used to smell the purple ink, and I always gave it out right after lunch, and I kept them awake. There were 5 lay teachers. I was one of them. The rest were LaSallian Christian brothers, and my first year's salary was $4,800, and I couldn't believe that De La Salle High School paid me that much money to do what I love so much. I taught 5 sophomore English classes and got hooked in by my principal, who was my principal when I was a student, to teach an 8th grade geography class for a week, and I ended up teaching the 8th grade geography class for a year. Things were different back then. The budget was balanced. Tuition subsidy, a good fundraiser. But today, it is so much different. There is competition. There's so many things as you look that come on the screen right now that we realize we're dealing with that we weren't dealing with back in 1967. Roles have changed, and those that have adjusted to the roles excel. Structures have been established that we didn't have before, we didn't think about before. Faculty has been invited to do things they've never gotten involved with before. And many, embrace it, and there are those that do not. Let me stay in my guarded kingdom, leave me alone. That's not the answer. And so development advancement officers over the last 40 years have sprung up all over. As we know, strategic planning has become a must. Enrollment management is our new language, and branding is your image is now crucial to name recognition. All of these things have taken place. All of these things continue to take place. And many times we put these in place. We put the what in place. And yet what this webinar is about is the how. We realize that things are different. We realize that as we move on down the line in terms of our future, that we've got to do things that are different. We've got to realize that we can't keep nickel and diming people to death on our fundraising, just like we've got to keep up our facilities with the quality of education because of charter schools and public schools building other facilities. We're faced a secular society that really doubts the value of having Christ in their schools on an hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute, day-to-day basis. And we realize that these challenges are real. And these challenges are challenges that we've got to face head on. The changing demographics, the charter schools. Some areas of the country, charter schools are putting Catholic schools out of business. They do everything the Catholic schools do except Christ is not there on a daily basis. The rising tuition costs, the aging facilities, the technology advances, the dollars that are needed for quality administrators and faculty and staff, the ability to clearly articulate a dynamic vision and purpose, building meaningful relationships, increased cost, measurable and exciting plans of action. These are the things that challenge us, and these are the things that we need to have in place if we indeed are going to be relevant, if we indeed are going to prevail and not just survive. And so with that in mind, we've got to make sure that we have a culture under which we can operate, that our culture is a culture that is going to really foster growth in these areas. And as we see, this is challenging. In the 10 years since 2005-6 school year, typo right there, 1,648 schools were reported closed or consolidated, while 336 school openings were reported. The number of students declined by 19.9% in the last 10 years. That not only is disturbing and in some cases startling, but we also realize that in terms of this, how do we effectively engage people? There are reasons for those statistics, but yet at the same time, a lot of it has to do with our culture. I realize a lot of that's demographic change. I realize a lot of that is financial crunch. I realize a lot of that is many, many things, and some of those have merged. We understand that. But at the same time, I think we need to grab a hold of this word culture. I think it is that important to the future of our Catholic schools, especially in the areas of advancement and development. As stated earlier, it is the how. As one principal once told me, it's the way we do things around here. From top to bottom, from the time the door opens in the morning to the time we lock it up and go home and leave the answering machine on. It's everything we do. It's how we do it. Not just one person, not just the marketing people, not just the people working enrollment management, not just the people who are running the annual fund, not just the principal who represents the school and the community, not just the president who speaks at the Chamber of Commerce. This is everyone. And each school has its own culture. And usually that culture centers around 4 areas: the core beliefs and values. You see the culture through the symbols, through the traditions, and through the rituals of the school. This is what we see. And how this is done becomes so important. And so with that in mind, I think it's important that we realize that there are a number of means that Catholic educators can use to secure Catholic schools. There's ways we can make our Catholic schools relevant. There's ways we can prevail. But at the heart of it all is the value of relationships. Tim Cook has done a huge amount of research and writing on this subject. It's all about relationships, that building on their strength and uniquely religious educational institutions, Catholic schools should set a new course for the future by making relationship building the distinctive purpose of the school's programs and processes. Relationship building in all areas. Not relationship building just with donors, relationship building with everyone. Relationship building. The whole idea being that it's the heart of what it means to be a Catholic school. We've stated that since we started this company, that development advancement is about the meaningful relationships with people. Many of you, we have several hundred people taking this webinar today, and many of you I've done workshops and consulted with and done webinars with, and you've heard me say as a company, development advancement is about the meaningful involvement of people in our mission vision for the future. And so therefore, with that, with culture, your culture should enable people to feel better about what they do. By communicating this sense of belonging, culture gives enriched meaning and purpose to daily activities. That sense of belonging, almost going back to that whole study that the Gallup organization has done on Catholic churches and other churches. That sense of belonging, that belonging leads to believing. The relationship piece that becomes so valuable, that we build our advancement, development, marketing, enrollment management efforts around people. But it is indeed a process. It's not a program that's inserted in the school. It is a process of change, and change is onerous, and change takes time. But yet it begins, though, when we look at it from the standpoint of this quote. This comes from us. And we believe that a Catholic school is going to attract as many resources, By that we mean people and dollars and new students and quality faculty and staff and community as it deserves to attract. And what that school deserves to attract will always be in direct relationship to the affirming, welcoming, and engaging culture that is demonstrated and lived minute by minute by everyone. We believe that so strongly because we've had the wonderful opportunity to work with schools that are right here. They're right there buried in that quote. And their results are outstanding. They get it. And it's exciting to see. And so as we understand this culture, let's talk about what we mean by this culture. What do we mean by it? We are talking about affirming. What does that mean? I'll never forget, a number of years ago, I was working with a high school down in Florida, a high school in Alabama, and a high school in Ohio. And in working with those three high schools, one of the things that they wanted to do in the consult was to zero in on what could be their biggest area of improvement. This is 15 plus years ago. And in terms of interviews, surveys, questionnaires, etc., it was amazing to me that these three schools, of whom they did not know each other, I was the only connection between the three, was that all three of them said the word that is on this slide is what they wanted to work on because it was not that present. Based upon the surveys, the questionnaires that they had done, and the input sessions, there was a lack of affirmation. It was not part of the culture. People were thanked at awards banquets, but it wasn't part of the minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour, day-to-day culture that everyone could participate in. And because of that, there was a feeling of being unappreciated, affirming, of the ability to affirm, the ability to support, the ability to make sure that there is a system of teamwork where we affirm the work of each other, that we affirm the work of the people who serve the food in the cafeteria, that we affirm the work of the volunteer who works on the annual fund, that we affirm the work of the student who brings her grade up from a C to a B, that we affirm the work of the principal who stays and works many times till late at night to make sure everything is ready, that we affirm the work of the pastor as he comes and celebrates liturgy with us, that we affirm the work of the alum who comes back and helps with an event. The affirmation. We affirm the work of the custodial group that keeps our classes clean. Affirmation. Welcoming. That we are a welcoming community. That we're a welcoming community not just at open house. That we're a welcoming community not just with new parents and not just with parent meetings, but we're a welcoming community day to day, month to month, minute by minute, hour by hour, that we greet each other in the morning. I'll never forget, I worked at this Catholic school years ago, and there was a faculty meeting, and in the first faculty meeting in September, after we'd gone through orientation and three weeks of classes. And we went to the faculty meeting, and the principal said, okay, after several weeks now, does anybody have anything that we need to improve on? And I raised my hand. I was never one to keep my mouth shut. And I said, yes. I said, why don't more people say hello to each other in the morning? Everybody looked at me like I was crazy. I said, no, really. I said, I walk down the halls and no one says a word. We're buried in our own worlds. All we have to do is say, hello, good morning, how are you? I know that sounds so simple, but it wasn't present. The ability to welcome, the ability to engage, which means involve. Belonging leads to believing, where we engage people. How much do we engage people in the life of our Catholic schools? Do we always go to the same people we engage, to involve, to invite? The awe culture is a culture that can change our Catholic schools for the better. This is a people business. It's a relationship building business. And so as we look, the key is understanding this culture. Let's delve a little bit more into it. And I think it's important that we ground it too. You know, out of the 132 contacts that Jesus had with people, recorded in the New Testament now, 6 were in the temple, 4 were in the synagogue, 122 were out in the mainstream of life with the people, out in the hallways, out in the football fields, out in the basketball fields, out in the community. We're there. We integrate. We really have a culture that engages, that welcomes, that we get into the mainstream of life where people are. Once again, it's all about the relationship building. And so let's look at some characteristics of what we see in those schools that have the awe culture or are trying to put it in place. That the vision, mission, and core values of the school reflect in the language the awe culture. There is language that talks about affirmation, welcoming, and engaging in the mission, in the vision, in the core values. There is a belief that we are going to constantly improve and forever what we do, where affirmation is the norm, but there's a belief in that. There's a letting go of power and control, a letting go of power and control. Had a wonderful workshop yesterday in the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee, with some wonderful people, great principals, wonderful pastors, superintendent, just super people making things happen as best they can. And I had a question from one of the principals: what's the role of the principal in all of this? And I said, the role of the principal in terms of advancement and development, marketing, and enrollment management, really 3 things. Number 1 is to make sure everything is organized. Make sure that you're the macro manager, not the micro manager. And make sure you build eyeball to eyeball relationships every day, hour to hour, and affirm the work that is done. A lot of heads, I think every head in the room, resonated with that statement. It wasn't that they were looking for power control. It was many times, having been a Catholic school administrator myself, many times we want to do it all. And if I want it done right, then I'm going to have to do it myself, because nobody can do it as good as I can. Now, I don't say that aloud. No, we don't say that aloud. But sometimes we think, yeah, but you know what? That's not going to kick that ball down the road. We've got to realize that we build this around ownership, a shared ownership, a true sense of belonging is this culture. And there's a strong stance taken against mediocrity and complacency. No room for it. Not in today's Catholic schools. Not there. Can't tolerate it. We won't be able to prevail. We may survive for X number of years, but we will not prevail. There's teamwork. There's no fear in an affirming, welcoming, engaging culture. I'll never forget several years ago in an elementary school, going in and starting the consulting process by interviewing 20 or 25 people. One of them was a teacher, and she came in and I said, you know, what impresses you about the school? And she told me some things, and I said, what do you think needs to be improved here? What are those areas that you'd look at and you'd say, gosh, we need to do something about this? And she said, I'm tired of being afraid. I said, what? Yes, I'm tired of being afraid. I have supervisors who walk in and they come in, and I feel like one of them stayed after, and I even had a few students in my class and started correcting me in front of them. I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that this is the norm. I'm just simply saying, even if it's in 1% of our Catholic schools, there is no place for that fear, because our culture is built around teamwork. It's built around where communication barriers are broken down. It's an attitude that sees relationship building as long-term. It is communication that's built around eyeball to eyeball. Jesus out with the multitudes, eyeball to eyeball, not hidden behind just paper and electronic communication, although that is important because that type of communication announces, reinforces, and builds a sense of information. But as we look at the characteristics of this culture, there's a commitment level from top down and the bottom up. There's less boss management and more team management. Attitudes are proactive, and we hear the words, we can. They're open door policies, an exciting vision that can be articulated because everyone has had some kind of role in creating that vision, whether it was a survey or a conversation or a cup of coffee or a planning session or whatever it may be. There's something, everybody has something, there's a stake there for everybody. And the realization that this positive culture change is everyone's responsibility. Everyone's responsibility. The cafeteria worker, the football coach, the 8th grade teacher, the principal, the pastor, the finance council member. It's everyone's responsibility. Everyone to build this culture. We're faced with too many challenges, as we saw earlier, not to be this way. And so, therefore, you have a school with this culture that's warm, it's inviting. The leadership is affirming. We're building something where people will want to come. They are appreciated. Everybody, day to day. It is an exciting culture that we shoot for. And because of that, there is welcoming. And I love this passage. So much welcoming. So much welcoming. There are ways we can do this. Yes, indeed. There are ways we can do this. But if we are going to do this, then we have to realize that we've got to know that it's really key that this be an organized and concerted effort, that this be something that we do that is systemic, as we said earlier. I mentioned something at the beginning of this webinar. I was really excited about a couple of things here this week as we begin 2016. On Monday, I heard from NCEA about this book that I've written called 25 Lessons Learned in 25 Years in Catholic School Development and Advancement. And working with them is really good. A lot of organization, a lot of focus, and we're thinking of even making this book not a textbook, but more of a workbook where we can teach and educate on those 25 lessons. And I was excited about that because what we're talking about today permeates the entire book. And the second thing that I was excited about was the opportunity to share this webinar with you today. And the reason why, I spent a lot of time in an automobile yesterday, left Slidell, Louisiana, and drove over to Fort Walton Beach and back, probably 400 miles. Had a lot of time to think, and as I looked at this whole ministry and looked at Catholic schools and thought about this workshop I did yesterday and this webinar doing today and the book that I need to edit and a bunch of these things, it really kind of maybe caused me to take a look from a higher level. From the bottom of my heart, I really believe that this, what we're talking about today, is the way our schools are going to prevail. I've said it and echoed it and talked about it. I've even gone so far and said that every Catholic school family that you have at your school needs to be visited with either in their home or at your school once a year in a one-on-one conversation to build relationships. I've talked about that for years. I've written newsletters. I've conducted workshops. I believe what we're talking about today will save our Catholic schools. I know that we are strong in our Catholic identity. I know that the 4 standards and benchmarks of mission and Catholic identity and governance and leadership and academic excellence and operational vitality are all so key. And I know we all work on those through our accreditation and through our day-to-day work. But there's a culture, though, that I think we need to improve on. We're talking about that culture today. And I'm not in any shape or form saying that you do not have this. I'm saying that how can we improve it? Because that's the real tone here of continuous improvement. How do we do this? That it's not just a program. It's not just a one-time event. It's not just a Christmas party. It's not just a thank you banquet. But this is part of the day-to-day culture of who and what we are and why we are about. I would like to think that I have some more years in my life that I can teach, that I can consult, that I can travel. And I guarantee you, this is the one topic that I would love to be able to make sure, if there's anything that this company stands for, it's this one. That the ability for us to engage people goes to the heart of what we need to be in terms of our Catholic culture. I know this may rub a little bit, but in a way, this culture is somewhat counter to the structure that we have in our Catholic Church and our Catholic schools. Counter in the sense that there is a top-down, and I realize that most organizational charts in schools deal with that. I realize in our Catholic Church, we deal with that. And so in some kind of way, if there was metaphorically a way to flip the pyramid, because guess what? While we do so many wonderful things, we can do so many more wonderful things to more and with people if we will integrate this culture that we're speaking of today. So important. First step is understand it. That's a simple statement, but I really question how many understand it. And the reason why I question that is I think we all have a grasp of it. When I talk about understanding it, not a day goes by that something does not come up in a phone conversation or a consult or a video conference or whatever, where it runs counter to this culture. And so understand what we mean by affirming. Understand that it is minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, week to week. Understand that welcoming is everything, not just an open house. Understanding that engaging is about building teams. As we say, it's about how you go about being you. And that's change. And the language that we use to invite, the language that we use to engage, the language that we use so we don't offend. So as we look at this, so important that the language be the language that has the nouns and the adjectives and the adverbs and the descriptors that affirm, that welcome and engage. Not just in terms of the written word, but just as much so, or probably more so, with the spoken word. And that there's a shift in our leadership where, once again, as I was chatting with folks yesterday in the Diocese of Pensacola, Tallahassee, we're not talking about relinquishing power, quote unquote. We're talking about engaging people and inviting people and making sure that the language we use is language that says, thank you so much for your input. Thank you for taking the time to being involved. Thank you, faculty member, for coming to this extra meeting on marketing. Thank you for being part of our faculty and staff. Thank you for being part of this faith community and pushing this faith community forward so we can reach out to more people and bring more people to Christ and Christ to more people. Thank you. You are doing great work, and yet at the same time, we can certainly all improve in many ways. And to you volunteers who are offering suggestions on how to make our school better, thank you for this input. But please understand, these suggestions and your recommendations, we're going to make sure the leaders of our school take these suggestions. And they look at these recommendations. But then obviously, as leaders of the school, they will make the final decisions, but they'll be based upon some great input. So thank you for that input. Thank you for these suggestions, because it certainly will help as we take a look at what we want to prioritize and what we want to move forward with in the future. There's a shift in that leadership focus. So understanding this culture becomes important. This is a one-day workshop in and of itself. Number 2, educate. We need to have people, our administration, our faculty and staff, our boards, our student leaders, our parents, our community, understand what we're talking about, that this indeed is a shift. Not 180 here, and I want to go back and drive this point home. There are many schools that are taking this in this webinar today that are doing this. We're talking about improvement. We're talking about continuous improvement. And so the ability to educate. Now, let me show you what I don't mean by this. I don't mean to educate just this is a 30-minute piece of the back to school faculty orientation session in August. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm about to educate in terms of making sure that this whole idea is integrated into our mission, into our vision, into our core values, into our communication, and everything that we do. Number 3, pipeline to your people. This, as some of you have heard me say, comes from Father Jim Manning, the word pipeline. Father Jim was president of Archbishop Alter High School in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and now he's pastor of St. Mary's Parish in Franklin, Ohio, building a brand new church in the Springboro, Ohio area. Also a member of ISPD's National Advisory Board. I picked this word up from Father Jim years ago. He said, Frank, and he was saying it whimsically, tongue-in-cheek, he said, Frank, we need to know what Bubba in the pew is thinking. We need to know what Betty in the bleachers is saying. And we need to know what Polly in the parking lot is talking about after that meeting. If we don't know that, we can't understand in order to offset whatever may be said. And so therefore, the ability to understand. Surveys. Many of you have heard me talk about the Ultimate Question Survey. It's a wonderful survey. Be glad to send anything about that you would need. Just shoot me an email. I've already sent it out to hundreds of schools. We've already conducted this survey with probably 50 schools in the last 5 years. But surveys and questionnaires, input and listening sessions, coffee gatherings. The ability to pipeline to your people and understand, keeping your finger on the pulse. So in terms of that, being able to have this information, not every 5 years, but all the time, consistently setting this up, making it happen. People want to share with you, whether it's a written survey or questionnaire, or whether it is being a family that's invited with 5 or 10 other families to come to the principals for a coffee meeting so we can just talk about how things are going. Pipeline to the people. I talked yesterday about, most every school has a school advisory board or a board of trustees or a board of directors. Why not give each board of directors, each advisory member every month, give them 10 names of parents who go to the school, or 5 names, and just call them and say hello. I used this example yesterday. Hi, Ms. Johnson, this is Frank Donaldson. I'm a member here of the school board here at XYZ Catholic School, and I just wanted to call and introduce myself, and I noticed you have a daughter in the 4th grade, and just to see how things going this year. My goodness, if this is about relationship building. It cannot rest on just the shoulders of the principal or the development director or the marketing director. This is systemic. This is everyone. Everyone. Everyone is part of this culture. It goes many, 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 many layers are built into this culture. You know, many times we look at this culture and we see it only on the top one or two layers. The layers go deep, and there are multi-levels of this, where it becomes throughout the system, this culture is there. Pipeline to your people. Build into the school's mission, vision, and core values, step 4. So my suggestion is to re-examine the documents. What do your documents say? What does your mission, vision, and core values say, where you would say, gosh, these are words and phrases that show us as an affirming, welcoming, engaging Catholic faith community. I'm not saying they don't. I'm just simply saying, what exactly is it that is there in your vision, mission, and core values, in those statements that are in your documents and on your walls? So my suggestion is step 4 is to re-examine these documents. As we said, step 1, understand the culture, really understand it. Understand what we mean by these words and how deep these layers go. 2, to educate and to make sure these key folks that are listed here, these 6 groups of people, understand this culture also. 3rd, understand in a two-way street what people are saying in regard, and what people we're talking about, these that are listed right here. What exactly does faculty and staff and board and students and parents and the overall community say? Pipeline to the people, and as we said, examine those statements. Examine the school's mission, vision, and core value statements. How well do they reflect this type of culture? Number 5, hire and involve accordingly. In other words, if indeed we are going to deal with a culture that is going to be affirming and welcoming and engaging, then our administration, our advancement, development, enrollment management, marketing personnel, our faculty and staff, our board and leadership groups, they need to be people that believe in this, that demonstrate it, that live it, that is part of the job interview, that is part of the overall description of volunteers as they come on board, that is part of that advancement office, that development office, that enrollment management, that admissions director, that is part of the teacher interview, that is part of people that we talk to that we're trying to recruit for our board and our school councils. Important, very important that we bring about a change. It's not the role of 5 people to integrate this culture, and it does take time. So step 5 was to hire and involve accordingly. Involve especially on the volunteer level. Step 6, integrate this into the 4 standard and benchmark areas of the school. How do we see this in mission and Catholic identity? How do we see this in governance and leadership? How do we see this in academic excellence? How do we see this in operational vitality? And while I realize our webinar is on this last area, operational vitality, which deals with resources, once again, how do we see this type of culture in all areas? So important to integrate this into that culture. Step 7, engage people. If we've done these 6 steps, engage people into creating a distinctive vision and strategic growth plan. In other words, many Catholic schools we work with, their strategic plan has been created by administration, board, and maybe 20 or 30 people. What we're saying is, how can we engage people into creating a distinctive vision based upon this type of culture and based upon those 4 areas that we talked about in terms of mission and Catholic identity, governance and leadership, academic excellence, and operational vitality? How can we put together that steering group that's going to work with this? How can we seek to engage people where they feel part of this? How can we take this strategic growth plan process, gather the data that's necessary on the front end, examine our mission, vision, and core values documents, take those 4 planning areas, look at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, identify the 2 or 3 challenges coming out of those areas, and then create those strategic solutions, all built around and in part of and under the umbrella of a culture that seeks to engage, a culture that seeks to affirm, a culture that seeks to welcome. New way of looking at things, really. So step 7, big step. It's a plan of action, though, where affirmation and welcoming and engaging are really the foundational pillars and the philosophy of how we move forward. So step 8 then, obviously the consistency of in-servicing and training. There are new people all the time, new faculty, new staff, new board, new student council, new parent leaders, new alum leaders, new parishioners, new pastors, new principals. Once again, the ability to set up where this is built into the school year, where we've got folks understanding this is the culture of how we do things. This is how we do it. This is how we do this. And that's important. That's important. So in those demonstrated areas, for example, I'll give you a perfect example because this came up recently in a bunch of interviews I was doing with a school up in the Midwest. In the interviews, I interviewed a bunch of people for this feasibility study before a capital campaign. And 10 people out of the probably 65 I interviewed, they talked about several coaches of the athletic teams that screamed and yelled, that used improper language, that were over the top. No, this interestingly impacted whether or not they wanted to become involved, not just in terms of financial giving, but also in terms of just wanting to be a campaign leader. In sharing that information with the administration, they were a bit surprised, but yet not so much, because it was demonstrated out in the community. Heart-to-heart conversations were had. That is not the way we do things here. That is not how we do this. That is not how we educate. That is not how we coach. That is not how we do this. And how we do it is we affirm, we engage. Sure, there's discipline. Discipline, to me, the definition is an organized way of making something work. But it's done in an atmosphere and a culture that is not demean, that is not demoralize, that is not subordinate, but it's done in an atmosphere of caring, of warmth, and yet at the same time, there are teachable moments to make that happen. And so as we talk about then going back to another step, hire and involve properly and accordingly. This is much the same. If the coach is not aware of this culture, and many times this may be a volunteer coach, that coach needs to be trained. And I'm just using this only as an example, not picking on coaches. But in terms of that consistency of in-service and training, 9, build the teams. The ability to build these teams. You've built the team with your strategic growth plan. You obviously have administrative teams. You've got core teams, you've got boards, you've got councils, you've got committees, you've got advisory groups, you've got planning groups, you've got implementation teams. Build teams. Together, everyone achieves more. But the team concept is relationship building. So we build teams. Every step of the way, we build teams, to make this culture work. And we integrate this culture into the language. We integrate this culture into our communication areas. We integrate this language of affirming and welcoming and engaging on our website, into our social media, into our newsletters, into our electronic communication, in our signage. I used the example in a webinar a couple of years ago about this one elementary school that I went into, and it was like walking into Disney, where everywhere in the school were signs of affirmation. I'm not talking about 3 or 4 signs. I'm talking about close to 100, all over the school, in the gym, in the hallways, in the classrooms, everywhere. Signs of affirmation, signs of welcoming, signs that pointed to a school that really was reaching out and wanting people to belong. So in terms of looking at how we move through and establish this, I think that becomes super important. As we look at these steps, once again, very quickly. 1, understanding the culture. Number 2, educating people so they understand what we're talking about. Number 3, pipelining so we can understand what folks are saying. Number 4, examining the documents that say what our school's mission, vision, and core values are about. Hiring and involving accordingly as we move to the future. Integrating this affirming, welcoming, engaging culture into our benchmark areas of school in terms of our planning for the future. Number 7, engaging people into creating this vision and strategic growth plan around those 4 areas. And this is the basic process of making that happen. 8 is consistently in-servicing and training as new people and reminders to people of this is how we do things. Building our teams so we are building a culture of relationships, with eyeball to eyeball work. And 10, integrating this into all of our communications. Once again, the R culture, to me, is a way we make it happen, is a way that will have our Catholic schools prevail. And then the next slide is just showing my prejudice. Obviously, the point to consider, work with a coach on this. But then the next slide says, because of our holiday coming up on Monday, take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. For some, this is a first step. For some others, you've taken steps and are on the staircase. Take the next one. Hopefully that the webinar has shown that there is a rationale for this type of culture. There is a reason why we need this integrated into everything we do in our Catholic schools. And so just 6 resources to share with you. Some I'm sure you are very familiar with. But once again, the entire focus here is that in order to make this happen, it really is left up to us. It's left up to us to take a look and see what we can do in terms of this culture and making it work. Did I lose? No, I thought I had lost something here. So some pieces there that we say and see are key to making this happen. But before I get to that, let me answer a few questions that have come up. And one is, how long does it take to make sure that this happens? And as I said before, it is a process. And I think we need to understand that it is a process. So as we look at making sure that we recognize this, I will send you a copy of the PowerPoint within the next 3 to 5 days, but you need to fill in the survey right quick in about 3 or 4 minutes. We need to make sure that you are moving forward in terms of understanding what this culture is all about. And I'm sure for some of you, it is about continuing what you're doing. There are some offerings that we have as a company that we always announce in our webinars. We have our executive coaching that is off-site, online, and working with Catholic schools. And there's information about that we'll be glad to send you. This executive coaching is for principals and advancement directors and presidents and pastors and school board members and the like. We can walk you through specific and successful strategies based upon our many years of working. And this executive coaching piece is something that we have begun over the last few months, and it's made available through many types of ways, all the way from phone conversations and conference calls to go-to meetings. And above all, I had a coaching session this morning at 8:30 Central Time. And one of the things the school asked me for was a PowerPoint that I had done several years ago. And before I got on the webinar, I made sure they had a copy of that PowerPoint. So what I mean by that is that you're open to our library of hundreds and hundreds of resources as part of this executive coaching piece. If interested, just shoot me an email or I think it's a question on the survey. There's another piece that we have indicated is that we are now beginning in 2016 retreats for teams. What a wonderful opportunity that would be wonderful to have is if you brought your team of 4, 5, or 6, and we spent 1, 2, or 3 days talking about culture, talking about how to integrate that culture. This is at our home here in South Louisiana. We are scheduling 5 retreats a year, and we're inviting different teams. They can be different combinations of different types of teams, but we'll keep them, we'll bring elementary and secondary and enrollment management, development teams, stewardship teams, diocesan teams, and basically the focus is going to be on what you need to work on, and you're coming away with a sense of a plan of action. We have 1-day retreats, we have 2-day retreats, we have 3-day retreats, and the times that are listed that are here. And this is all in a setting that is built to be relaxing and engaging and welcoming. And we have certain amenities, obviously. If you're coming from out of town, we can transport you. There are hotels 10 minutes away. My wife is a good Southern cook, and she will cook every meal along with a couple of other friends. We have Mass every day, refreshments throughout the day, in a retreat setting out in the country on the river. Promise you no alligators come into the yard. We've been living here for almost 70 years. And once again, it is an opportunity. So I invite you to take a look at the piece that deals with the webinar PowerPoint. And once again, please answer the survey. We'll get the webinar out to you in the next 3 to 5 days. And hopefully this has been helpful. I have thoroughly enjoyed sharing this with you because I strongly believe this goes to the heart of the future of our Catholic schools. I wish you the best. If we can help you in any way, please let us know. Thank you so much for joining us.